Hello, everyone. It is 3:31, and we have a quorum, so we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order of the Rules of Procedure and Charter Review Task Force. Mr. Johnson, would you call roll, please?
Councilman Fugit.
Here.
Councilman Helsley. Dr. Lyons. Here. Councilwoman Parker. Former Vice Mayor Pavlis. Here. Former Vice Mayor Saunders. Vice Mayor Smith.
Here.
We have 4 members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, you have received the minutes. They were sent out for review.
I have a note on the first one.
All right.
I can explain.
Yes.
On 3A, the amendment to the March 18 minutes, I'm asking for a correction. You'll find this on page 3 of your packet. Just a simple word change in the motion that was recorded. It should be to approve the minutes, not the ordinance. So that is all I'm asking for.
Second.
All in favor of the amendment? Aye. All in favor of the approval of the minutes as amended? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. All right, all right, now, all in favor? Aye. I was going to say without objection, but we'll just, all right. Did anyone sign up for public forum?
We do have one person.
All right.
Miss Lindsay Yaremko.
All right, is this on?
Yes.
Okay. Lindsay Ramco, 1750 Hillwood Drive. Just wanted to come in today because I've heard there's been some talk about public forum and maybe considering changing rules as it relates to public forum. I wanted to ask that you not, as you're thinking about how long these city council meetings are, and I've been to the last 2, we were here until 10 o'clock at night. That is a lengthy meeting. So as you're looking at ways of reducing the length of time for city council meetings, I'm hoping that even though it might be easier to maybe limit public forum, that that is not on the chopping block. And I've also heard talk of maybe there being a quota of the amount of times that people can get up and speak. And I'm not sure if that's because attempting to preempt any sort of new state laws that might come out about people being allowed to speak on items that, even if it's not germane. So as you're considering other state laws or reducing the amount of time for city council meetings, please do not limit public forum. We don't have a lot of public hearings here. Even the workshop that you're having on Thursday about the sales tax, there's no public forum on that, at least it's not on the agenda. So, city council, it's important that the public is able to speak into what's being considered and speak into the process. So that is my ask, and thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
No, ma'am.
Thank you. That concludes public forum. No reports of officer or subcommittee, no special committees, no special orders, and with your indulgence, without objection, I am going to move item 8B to the beginning, switch it with A and B, so that we can hear our report from the Howard Baker School at the beginning of the meetings before we get into the bulk of our conversation. So without objection, is that okay with everybody? All right. Mr. Morgan, would you like to come give us a report? First of all, I want to say thank you very much for your diligence in attending all these meetings and the research you've done to help us get a sense of what everyone else in the state is doing. We have lots of towns, lots of municipalities, and so it was a lot to look at. Appreciate you working with MTAS on the survey. So look forward to your report and some recommendations you may have for us. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. And I've appreciated the opportunity to kind of look into some of this. And so I'd like to pick up where I left off as I was doing my earlier research, looking at ordinances and resolutions that contain the rules of procedure from other cities. I think I had been looking at 14 when we last spoke, and I expanded that to just under 60. And so probably the largest takeaway was that there is a widespread adoption of Robert's Rules of Procedure that's specified, as I believe we expected. About 3/4 of those cities do clearly state that that is what they fall back on when their internal procedures don't specify what should be done in a situation. So probably the other two big things that were important takeaways from the content analysis portion of my research were that there are some unique rules that are not iterated on across municipalities that you might only find in one or two places. And I wouldn't make strong recommendations based on these, but they might be useful to look at. So examples of those, Laverne, for example, has a specific section that talks about when practical, the mayor should put specific effort into making sure that opposing viewpoints on items are noted. And I believe we do have provisions that are similar to that, but that is actually rarer than I originally expected to find. And another good example of something like that is Morristown has a provision that specifies that citizens should speak before non-residents, for example. That's something that might be practiced by other municipalities, but if it is, it's not specified. The other is that certain types of agenda items are treated a little bit differently than others as far as the time limits given. Zoning ordinances are the biggest one. So for example, a city like Memphis usually assigns, the average that I saw across all municipalities on speaking limits is between 2 and 5 minutes. Zoning ordinances are frequently treated differently. So Memphis would give a zoning applicant 15 minutes that they can divide across their initial time, and then there will likely be opposition in between, and then they can use their remaining time for a rebuttal.
May I ask a question? When you say 15 minutes, that's up to a certain number of speakers, no matter how many. You get 15 minutes, your side gets to state a case?
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
I saw a similar provision in Chattanooga as well. That was 9 minutes divided more evenly, so 7 minutes, and then there's 9 minutes of opposition, and then 2 minutes of rebuttal.
Okay, not 15 minutes per person? Not from what you saw?
Not from what I saw.
Okay, thank you.
Right, and we're also differentiating between the public comment on an agenda item, which that might be, or is that versus, as opposed to the general public forum where anything could speak to? Do you know whether that zoning applies at the latter as well? Or
usually it was written when discussing agenda items,
Right.
but it would be a little bit difficult to tell. A lot of the time, there's not strong differentiation made.
Right.
But I would say that was probably the most use I got out of the content analysis section of what I did. So the remaining research I did was the survey that I sent out with MTAS, which was fairly helpful. So that clarified some things about workshops. So I believe we don't have a strong definition for workshops, and they are used for a wide variety of things in the city of Knoxville. And I found that was pretty much consistent with other cities in the state of Tennessee. So one of the most common uses was determining agenda items for upcoming regular meetings of the governing body, but that others would also include having outside presenters to come in to speak on specific policy issues or speak about their departments if it's a city-level department. The remainder of the survey generally dealt with things like public comment period and speaking on individual agenda items. Frequently, I would say a little bit more than half of cities actually do not allow residents to speak during the consideration of an individual agenda item outside of those that have required public hearings, like oftentimes ordinances on their second or third reading or zoning applicants. As far as the public comment period, a couple of interesting findings were that they oftentimes do not have to be germane to the agenda. That was a majority of cases that I saw, and I believe that's consistent with our practice, in spite of the fact that that is not as strict as what state law would allow. The other important findings were that 3-minute time limits on individual speakers during that section are the most common. That's somewhere around 70% of the respondents that I got. And 5-minute limits are the next most common that I found, which is consistent with our current practice, I believe.
Sorry, Mr. Morgan, can I follow up one item?
Yes.
I think I heard you say more than half do not allow public comments on individual items. Is that what I heard you say correctly?
That was what I got in my survey
Okay,
responses.
Interesting. All right, thank you.
And then the final significant finding that I had was that a majority, around 3/4 of the respondents, indicate that their public comment period is actually placed at the beginning of the agenda, which might be right after the reading of minutes or even before, and that we're in the minority as far as putting that at the end of our order of business. And so finally, I would also like to discuss that I looked at charter review processes. So I looked into this, and as far as I can tell, having a charter review process that's cyclical instead of ad hoc is a relatively uncommon practice. So the two current ones that I found were Nashville and Oak Ridge, and then I also looked at Knox County in addition. And each of them has a slightly different process. There's not a lot of information laid out in their charters about those processes. And I actually reached out to Knox County and I asked whether or not there was more information about that available. And they basically told me, no, what you see in the charter is about it. So what I would recommend is, if you would like to know more about that, a good place to start would be to get the minutes from those meetings and review them, which they offered to give me, Knox County. And I also do believe that Amendment 7 of the Tennessee State Charter addresses certain policies for home rule cities as far as how they should conduct their charter review processes. And that is probably the best course of action, is to review those two things. And that is essentially what I have for you. So thank you.
Thank you. I know some of us asked questions as we thought of them, or we were afraid we would not remember them. So does anybody have any, just speaking for myself, does anybody else have any other questions or a follow-up thought about that? It was a lot of information. You will have the report that I can disseminate to my colleagues, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And I could give you the raw survey data and the minutes that I do have if you would like.
Well, I probably won't know how to interpret the raw survey data, but sure, go ahead. That would be wonderful. Some people are more research-minded than me. So any questions about that? So basically, my takeaway, if I could summarize, is that most cities that have public forum that is open to any kind of comment is usually at the beginning of a meeting, not at the end, and that most people, when they speak, most cities give 3 minutes. The next most common is 5
Yes,
per speaker.
that is what was reported.
Okay, and then there are all different variations about whether or not most people don't even let you speak to items on the agenda.
Unless they are required by law.
Unless they're required by law, but, okay. And that would be within their own city or county ordinances, probably.
Yes.
Okay. Any questions? No?
Well, I want to thank you, Dane, for the good, very helpful work.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate it.
I did
Yes.
have one question, sorry.
Yeah, go
Yes.
ahead.
Did your research focus on, the general meetings of legislative bodies, or did you also look at, for instance, for an example, workshops?
I generally kept to regular meetings, so I allowed survey respondents to give longer responses if they wanted to. So I do know that some of those time limits do differ between their regular meetings and their workshops within the same municipalities. But generally speaking, I stuck to the regular meetings of the governing body.
Okay.
And I believe what you shared also was that workshop means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, even within the same body, sometimes.
Yes.
Some things can be called a workshop that are reporting, some are actually working on things, some are studying the agenda before the meeting.
Yes, and some of these respondents would even, I framed it as workshops, they would call them work sessions, and they would mean the same thing, so.
Yeah, okay. So we're not alone in not clearly defining. Okay, thank you.
And a comment on the workshops that I believe would follow is you said, I think in fact, our speaker at the beginning mentioned public forum not being on the workshop agendas, which is correct. I've never seen that on the agenda, but also in 20 years of looking at them, I've never seen council fail to provide for public input. So the fact that it's not there doesn't prevent that from happening. It's just not there as a required part of the way things are done often.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, and I assume, are you finished with your degree?
I am, yes.
So congratulations, and I'm glad we're the last thing you got to do on your way out the door to do great things in public policy, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We may not be his favorite last thing, but I'm glad we were. So, Mr. Johnson, if you'll continue with the agenda.
Yes, thank you. We're going back to 8A, which is a review and a proposal to vote on the recommendations that this body has reviewed to date. Included in your agenda packets, beginning on page 16, are the rules that you have reviewed to date, changes. I plan on covering the ones that we reviewed at the last meeting, the one in April. On page 20 of the packet, this is where in Rule 13, subsection G, the committee, or the task force rather, struck out the word "its" in reference to workshops and inserted the word "a," or the article "a," the council at a Thursday workshop. On page 23 of the packet, rule number 24, this is concerning, the original language was procedure upon deferral. This was to strike out the word deferral wherever it occurred and insert the word postponement or some derivation thereof. And on page 24 of the packet, the task force agreed to, on Rule 26, subsection E, took out some redundant language about a roll call voice vote and just listed it as a roll call vote for filling a vacancy on council, on city council. So those were the rules that this task force reviewed at the April meeting and reached some kind of consensus on.
Thank you. So I'll just be honest. My hope is that if we visited all these and we've talked about these and we've said we were in agreement, if someone would like to make a motion to approve these changes so far, we can actually complete something and then move forward to some other changes so that we're not necessarily having to continue to have to improve everything all at one time. If we approve these, then we can just work on approving the rest. Then we can take it to the body once we've done the whole thing, but it would be nice. I think we've done a lot of work. It would be nice to, if y'all are in agreement, perhaps have a vote on these items. Dr. Lyons?
Yes, I think that would be a good idea. So we get some closure on what we've talked about, assuming there's consensus, which
Yes.
seems to be. You never
Well,
know.
we'll
Then
find out.
We'll find out. I'll be glad to make such a motion.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second on the floor to approve let's see, starting with our rules of procedure, section 7.5-61 through section 7.5, Rule 87. That's 7.5-87, Rule 26, filling vacancies. And we have a motion and a second on the floor to approve that. Any questions, any other comments? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Yay. Yay, we can say we got some stuff done. After how many months have we been meeting?
Since February, or January.
Yes, just a minute. 5 months? Yeah, 4 or 5 months. All right. Thank you. So we will begin now with where we left off, section, where, Mr. Johnson, where are we?
We are
Rule-
on item 8C. This is a review of the rules that the body has postponed further consideration until perhaps now.
Yes, well, let's go ahead.
I did want to report, though, there were a few questions that this body has asked over the past few meetings, and I have responses to those
Okay,
from various departments. So,
that would be good.
yes, on Rule 13, and that's on your packet, you can reference it. There's a clean version of the rules that begin on page 25, if you want a unamended and a version. Rule number 13, we asked a question of the engineering department with respect to subsection D. This was about the acceptance of roads or other improvements. The engineering department recommended keeping this language. They cited an example from the mid-90s where the city did accept roads and other improvements from a subdivision. So they recommended keeping this language, though it may be rare that it does happen.
Okay.
Rule number 15, which is on packet page number 29, we asked a question that was on voting, and it was on subsection E. We asked the law department about this, whether it was still warranted to keep. They recommended keeping it in case the courts were ever to revisit their precedent with respect to Robert's Rules of Order and bodies that vote on matters. We also asked a question on rule number 16 about the certification of funds. That's also on page 29. The Finance Department confirmed that this information is being provided on the agenda information sheet, the AIS, and it's under the fiscal information. So I asked Director Evans. He confirmed that that was being provided there. Lastly, rule number 26, which concerns the filling of vacancies. I asked City Council's attorney, Mr. Frost, about the term, or rather the sequencing of a special election if there were a vacancy in the office of mayor. He confirmed that section 705 of the charter does cover this scenario, and if the next regular election from the occurrence of a vacancy is within 10 months, that the council would fill the seat with an acting mayor and they would serve throughout that term. And there would be no special election. This most recently happened with the resignation of Mayor Haslam, and council chose Councilmember Brown to serve as acting mayor.
Thank you. And the way you said that answers my question. Council picks among its members. It is not a default to the vice mayor. He happened to be vice mayor.
He was not
He
actually
was not
vice
vice
mayor.
mayor. Okay. Okay.
I can't recall who was vice mayor at the time. Maybe Mr. Pavlis can.
Well, it doesn't matter. It just means we would pick within the 9.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Any other questions, everybody? Pardon? Oh, sorry, I wasn't looking that direction. Ms. Parker?
Just along those same lines, I had an update for the committee. I spoke with staff at Knoxville Community Media about Rule 23, that's Section 7.5-84 of our rules, broadcast media, and they reviewed the language and saw no needed changes.
Okay, good, thank you. So, we're good. All right.
I don't know where you want to begin.
I want to begin wherever, after everything we approved.
Okay. So, excuse me, rule number 9 is where, is one of the items that we had postponed consideration of. This begins on packet page number 27, the introduction, proposed ordinances and resolutions. That the council Manic District particularly affected by proposal is listed, that's not being consistently followed. We already actually covered this, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, I think we did.
Yeah. So we'll go to rule number 14. And that begins on packet page number 29. This is about referral to committees or workshops. This body desired to revisit this later concerning the subject of referring legislation to committees. This isn't, council doesn't use workshops for that purpose. It could, it isn't. But this committee was unresolved as to whether or not that should be changed or not.
Any more thoughts on that? I mean, we don't even really have that many standing committees.
We have one.
Yes. Any thoughts on this? Or
I had one about item C, or Rule 14C.
yes.
And this is about the committee, which is a proposed ordinance to being referred, shall make a report to council at the next regular meeting. The proposed ordinance or resolution may be placed on the agenda by the mayor or by majority vote of those council, members of the council present. Does the item have to be approved by majority of the committee first before it returns to council? I mean, that's,
To my way of thinking.
that's what we're going to have to do here, but
Yeah.
I think
Maybe we,
it's not explicit here, and maybe that's implied in Robert's rules, but it doesn't say anywhere that it has to pass through a committee before it comes back to council. I don't know if that's intentional or not. It was just thinking of this committee.
I suspect that your line of thought about Robert's Rules of Order would apply. If a committee cannot reach an agreement, the report would simply be that there is no agreement and they don't have a recommendation. I mean, that could have been the result of this body if no agreement could have been met.
yeah,
Okay, so you all think it's implied that the committee has to, by a majority vote, approve an item before it returns to council?
yeah. My way of thinking, the same rules would apply to a committee that apply to council. You know, we can't move forward on something unless the majority of council approves it. So I would think that a recommendation from a committee would work the same way, but if we would feel better to put it in there, that doesn't seem to be a problem.
We don't address it in the committee section, but if nobody else is concerned about this, we can move on. I just wanted to,
Either we do it there or we put it in the committee section about everything.
yeah. All right. Anybody else see the need for this? If not, we can move on.
The need for your recommendation?
Yeah, that it has to be approved by the
Yes.
majority.
Do we need to explicitly state that something has to be voted on by a majority of committee members before it is placed on the agenda of council? Currently, it doesn't state that.
I would go so far to say it must be voted on and passed by a committee, approved by a committee, not, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Can't hurt to say it.
It makes sense to me
Yeah.
what you all are suggesting. And I think also because it's a referral to both a committee or a workshop, but then the language in C is only about a committee. It's making it a little unclear what the expectations are, but I could see a report coming from a process and not necessarily a vote.
Well, I'll tell you what prompted this was that if you follow then in item D, which does refer to a workshop, it doesn't say anything about approval by vote of the workshop. It actually goes a step further and just says it will automatically be placed on a regular agenda, even regardless of whether the council member who requested the workshop was even present at the workshop.
Yeah, and since we don't vote at workshops, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
But it also makes sense to me that you would want to report back from the workshop before council votes. But when sent to a committee, it makes sense to me that that council would want a recommendation from the committee and would want that committee to continue meeting, hopefully until recommendation or until, the committee votes on some recommended action for council.
So,
But I do think, to your point, there could be language cleaned up here, but primarily in a separate section, we address the process, which we talked about there being another section coming up, but I don't remember the language of it.
well, can I ask a follow-up question on this while we're talking about this? It sounds to me like that we need to make a clear distinction between the power of a committee and the power of a workshop.
Yeah.
A committee would, the way I'm reading this, a committee could bring it forward. What C says is that it could be placed on the agenda by the mayor, whether the council wants it or not, even if it's referred to council.
If I could interject here.
Yes, perhaps you've lived this?
Thank you. I think if you want to have the imprint or primature of the committee, that it should be passed and identified as being a committee report, but in fact, any council member who chooses can put something
On the agenda.
before council. So this really wouldn't be preventing anything. It would just say if it's going to come on as a recommendation of committee, it needs to be voted on. And if you had, I could see hypothetically one person on the committee feeling strongly and not prevailing, but nothing would prevent them from putting it on, but it would just be their recommendation, like any end ordinance somebody might advance.
Well, I think that the county committee requires a majority vote before a rule change on behalf of the committee can make
Yeah,
its way on the.
Right, that would be on behalf of the committee, would be
Yeah.
the distinction otherwise. And of course, it would hypothetically carry a lot more weight. The committee had studied it and it's coming forth to the other council members. But still wouldn't, I guess what I'm trying to get at is you're not really going to be silencing any minority viewpoint on the
No.
committee because they could go ahead and bring it themselves
No,
if they felt
but
strongly.
it would preempt, you wouldn't probably do this, but Councilwoman Fugit placing something on the agenda of council in the name of the committee that just voted down what she's
Yeah,
recommending.
absolutely, and that'd be,
This is true, and I would not,
You know.
but yes, I think, but
How it makes the head swell, you never know.
Yeah. But I think if it's going to say it's a recommendation of the committee, then there needs to be a formal vote of the committee to actually recommend it. If y'all disagreed with me, I could still bring it, but
Yeah.
it would just be Lynn's bringing it,
That's right.
not the task force is bringing it. Y'all okay with that? Make the words
This,
sound good, Will.
This actually, we're actually kind of experiencing this a little bit with the audit committee. So some language here makes me think of the audit committee, because sometimes we do have discussions as an audit committee, and we might reach consensus, but there's no formal vote.
There's no record of formal decision made by the body.
I think the chair has resolved to take more votes in the future.
And this would give guidance to all of our committees, including audit committee, right?
Into the future.
Yeah,
Right.
and
Into the
going
future.
forward. Because if we get a different chair of a committee, they might
Right,
not.
have different practices. Yeah.
I think it, to your point, encourages voting in the committees.
Yes.
On a more formal basis.
Okay.
I'll be happy to come
Thank
up with
you.
some language.
Yes, thank you. All right.
Continuing on to Rule 18, which I'm sure you won't want to spend much time on. It's a trifle. This is the order of debate. I don't know how the task force wants to tackle Rule 18. I see Rule 18 as really being resolved into two major components. That is debate of members and then the public engagement. Those are really two separate facets of this rule. So it might be simpler to take them one at a time, but
Thoughts? That sounds good.
so one element, if we're going to begin with members' debate, that's where the committee wants to spend its time right now. The debate of members, especially with respect to, your current rules allow for debate without a motion. This is fairly common with respect to especially committees and, or rather, appeals for zoning matters and zoning issues especially, where there's not a motion in the beginning. I don't know, so if there's a change desired there or not.
I will say, when I first joined this body, I was very confused because the other body I served on had to have a motion on the floor to begin debate. But that's not the practice of this body, so I think that's fine. I just think, any thoughts? When I was on the Board of Education, we could not start talking about an agenda item until someone had made a motion and seconded it. Well, but our
is
rules,
Robert's rules,
but our
but-
rules can trump that, and our rules don't require
I
it.
noticed that too. It's in Robert's rules, but it's been clearly, as you say, Robert's rules apply
Unless we do something differently. And
that's
we,
what's not.
Well, it's been a rule that I noticed we weren't following initially. But it was something I pushed for because it was in our rules that we start following it. And one reason I did push for it is because, especially as someone who represents minority communities, underrepresented communities, it allows that representative to put an item on the agenda and bring their issue forward. And have, also the public is able to speak on the item and have their voices heard, even if it doesn't have overwhelming support. And so it allows minority voices to be represented in their government.
but,
Just a point of clarification, to
Yeah.
stay with that thread if I may. Our rules don't state that public can speak to an item that doesn't have a motion, unless I'm missing something here.
I think it includes the public forum part of it.
I think that's more of a consequence of the way in which council proceeds through an agenda item, whereby you hear from the public before sometimes you even get a motion.
Yeah, like appeals or zoning matters where we have speakers, for example.
Correct, yeah. It doesn't say it explicitly.
So right now, if something is on the agenda, debate can begin whether there's a motion for it or not, which is unlike anything I've
Whether it's
ever.
a zoning matter or not.
Yes. So, and if we practice the rule of the public can speak to any agenda item before we even talk about it, if, the way it is now, you read it, we call for speakers to sign, who've signed up to speak to the item, and all that happens before we have any idea whether somebody wants to approve it or not.
So the challenge with proceeding with debate before there's a motion is that I could bring 10 resolutions to council, and I could spend 8 minutes with 3 speakers for each of them. And y'all got to listen to me. For 10 items.
With no support.
Nobody wants to listen to that, but.
No, but I'm just saying.
But yeah, so right now, you can do that. Well, the cat's out of the bag. I just thought of the idea, so I might bring 10 next meeting. But I think the trade-off for many of these things is important. And it's not just important for the sake of hearing somebody do that for a long time. The biggest consequence, a lot of times, when you aren't earnest about dialogue, is that you make somebody who's waiting on a matter 12 AZ sit through my 10 resolutions and speakers to just hear me talk. And so that's the consequence, that when you think about equitable access to speaking to topics in an earnest way, that's what we also have to be mindful of too, is not just to let anybody speak all the time as much as they want without, there's a consequence of that, and that is that all of those parties have to stay till 10 o'clock or later. So that happens enough, you erode the trust of the people who want to speak for their item, that they came once a year or once every 6 months or whatever. So comment over.
Turn on your mic, please.
Yeah. I want to prevent those circumstances without putting too much restriction on public input.
And pull your mic down.
I will.
I'm just giving direction.
I'm going to beat you. So, and I've wondered this before, why can zoning issues that people come for once every their lifetime or whatever not be put at the beginning of the meeting? Why do they have to sit till sometimes midnight to talk about their property being rezoned against their wishes?
That's not a requirement, so council has a prescribed order of business.
We can change
and
it.
you
But
could
can we
adjust it.
change that? Because, I mean, I've seen them sit out here for hours.
Yes, you could
waiting.
adjust it, holistically, so, for every meeting going forward, or you could adjust it per meeting. You could get into a certain meeting, like
You
the
can do it on the
evening
fly.
at 6 o'clock tonight, and you could change it.
That's what we did tonight, changed an item.
Exactly,
Right.
yeah.
But I think my personal thought is, I think consistency for our community to understand when zoning items are going to be heard
Sure.
would be beneficial. And if we feel like zoning, which is where most discussion takes place, and it is the thing that most people come to the meeting for, to talk about, perhaps that should move to the beginning before we, zoning ordinances are at the beginning. Other ordinances can stay somewhere else, but
We got to be here for all of it anyway.
yeah, it
So at
doesn't
the end
matter
of
to
the
me.
day,
I'm
they
just
don't.
thinking, I'm thinking about the homeowner, the person who's dealing with something, and
So following that, it would be second reading ordinances, first reading ordinances, then resolutions. Is that the concept you have in mind?
I would say first reading of zoning ordinances, and then second reading of zoning ordinances.
Currently, we have
because-
second reading first, and I think it's in the vein of what you're talking about generally, which is if something was approved last
Right.
meeting,
True, it's probably
We
going
want
to
them to
move
go
fast.
first because 95% of those are going to get passed quickly and they can go home.
Correct.
So then it's the first reading of ordinances that are the first time for a group of people.
And then we move to
Yeah.
resolutions.
And then move to resolutions.
I actually like that better.
I like it for the people who have to go. We're here anyway.
So is that a recommendation from the committee?
Well, but that's a different section.
It is.
It is, but let's put a pin in that and let's know that's kind
I
of,
would like to come back to it because I
Yeah, I
think
do too,
I think
because
it's
I-
a good concept to consider.
go ahead.
Yes. Moving beyond that issue, sticking with members' debate, members, or that is getting preference in debate, so who gets called on first. The sponsor gets called on first, and a committee spokesperson would be called on first. That's in your rules.
So like when I make a report about this, I'll be called on first.
You would have the right to
Right to be.
preference, yes. If there's no discussion about that, then we can continue to the next item.
Well, I just wanted to say that, I think as we look through our rules, and especially thinking about order of debate, public forum issues, First Amendment issues, my hope would be that we only limit hearing from the public where we see a need to address an ongoing issue rather than trying to anticipate something that could potentially be an issue one day. And our meetings are rarely long. Now, we all have a different definition of long, so I hesitated to say are rarely long, but they rarely go until midnight is one way of saying it. And our public forum, we already have limitations on it, and, we have the decision on meeting days to suspend our rules or not, to allow for a longer public forum. But, especially for me, as being the first Black person ever elected to an at-large position, I definitely can recognize the constituents who voted me in, who are feeling represented in ways they are telling me they haven't felt in the past, and it would make sense since no one with a similar background has been in an at-large seat in the city of Knoxville. And there are times that I bring items forward that I don't know if it has majority support, but there's a large chance that it does not. But it represents a large constituency here in the city, and it just happens to be a minority of voices. And their voices deserve to be represented, even if the majority doesn't agree. And I don't know of any nefarious intentions from myself or anyone else in placing those items on the agenda. No one's attempted to place multiple items just to take up time. I think that everyone who gets elected introduces items to the agenda to represent our constituents and not to come and play legislative games. And so I would want us to try to think about those minority voices and not restrict debate when we really haven't seen a problem that needs to be addressed.
So, go ahead, Counsel.
To clarify, we're still in the member order of debate section. Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah. And so right now, the way it is each member gets 5 minutes.
unless it's a sponsor and they get 8 minutes.
Right. So, and that seems to have been working,
Yeah, I don't see any real need to change
that,
that aspect.
no.
So the next element that I was going to speak to is close to this issue, which is the number of speeches per question per member or per motion per member. At present, this body has a custom of having an unlimited number of speeches per member on any given motion. Your written rule really says that there's a limit of 2 speeches per question or per motion. But you have a custom of ignoring that, which is fine. Customs are a part of how a body functions also.
But we don't want a custom of ignoring a rule. I think that's what we're trying to.
Right, I mean, if you want to make it more explicit, you could state that there's unlimited number of speeches.
I have a couple of thoughts on this. One is, I think, I agree with many of Councilman Parker's sentiments around not anticipating an issue, seeing it first. And I think the ability to speak a little longer if you're bringing something, I think has merit. And none of these things are live on an island, right? There's that, and then there's the 2 speaking options per person limit. So there's a balance here of give and take on these things. And council, I think, another lever in that equation is council always has the ability to suspend its rules
And/or call for the question.
and call for the question. So all of these levers, I think, are important to consider, not items in isolation or not aspects in isolation, but all of these things play a role. And so I'm okay with the existing rules. I do have caution for continuing the practice of allowing debate before a motion. I think that is a concern for me.
Yeah, Councilwoman Helsley.
So we have a rule that we don't follow now, and I don't understand why, because it's been not followed ever since I've been here. But I can't imagine
Me
that
too.
anybody needs to speak longer than 10 minutes to any item. That is a huge amount of time. And that's what you would have if you speak to it twice, you got 10 minutes.
Or even, actually, you'd have 13 if it's your item.
If it's your item, then you would have an extra 3. That's like an eternity. Like, I could read a novel in half of that time. I mean, it's just crazy to give that kind of time and then people just prattle with it, It's like you just kind of repeat yourself and move on. I think it's a lot of time. I don't know why it's not enforced now, so blame it on the new kid. I'm for the rule.
Well, I do think we have the right to suspend our rules.
We do? Yeah.
And we also have the right to recommend the creation of a standing rules committee that could look at this more than ad hoc at some point
Yeah, I
in the
think that-
future.
I thought that's what we were
That's what we
doing.
are doing.
We are, but I'm saying, we're doing this now, but there's nothing in this ordinance that creates this committee, a rules committee. For council does not have a rules committee as a standing committee.
Gotcha.
I'm just saying, at the end of all this, we might want to recommend that so that as things come along, they could be referred to the Rules Committee for a longer discussion. Not about this particular item, just
In general,
any
yeah,
item
that's-
that
I think that's cool.
as you see with your meetings. Other legislative bodies have that. Sorry to interject that. It is not germane to this. I believe I am out of
Yeah, stay
order.
germane to the topic, Chair. I'm kidding.
Yes, I'm out
No, that's
of
cool,
order.
that's cool. I'm kidding, that's cool.
So, Mr. Pavlis, you've served a number of times. Your light is on. What are you thinking?
I think, when I sit here and thinking back through the years, and it's been a long time, but the suspension of the rules is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Because, I've been part of it, and I've voted for it probably way more times than I voted against it. I don't ever remember voting against it. But unless you go that deep into this subject, it's for all for naught. Because somebody automatically hit their light, I make a motion to suspend the rules and allow councilperson whomever, or from the general public, you know, I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I think unless you address that, I think everything else we talk about is for naught.
Dr. Lyons?
Well, I think just in putting a kind of punctuation on this discussion, the rules ought to be, in practice, ought to be consistent and brought into, if we're practicing something different, then we need to change the rules if that's what people want to do, or need to follow them. But I think it's really bad practice to say, well, we have these rules, but that one really doesn't count. That leaves the public unsure, well, what else can you not count whenever you want? So I would recommend we get the rules pretty concise with a default that most of the time they're going to be followed. You always have the option to suspend the rules, but if you always suspend them, you're also not really better off. They're not much of rules. But I think you always need that option. It needs to be exercised on occasion, because that will be necessary on occasion. So, but this outlier where it says twice in the rules and we ignore it, I think that needs to be resolved. Either follow them or change the rules.
Thoughts? Councilwoman Parker?
Well, I do recommend changing them. We've had several debates where we have gone over those limits, and multiple council members needed more than their 2 turns for 5 minutes. And where I've noticed, I mean, it's a debate, and so as one council member makes an argument, it makes you think of something, and you bring up a counter or questions or, something that furthers that discussion. But I wouldn't limit that. I would limit it through our other tools, as others have said, like calling the question. Yeah.
Okay, I personally would prefer not to go from 2 times that we're not following to unlimited. I do think there is something in there that, because I'm also not sure, quite frankly, that many council members have ever really understood that you're only supposed to talk twice.
A rule that's not enforced, that's not surprising.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So people might be more cogent with their points, but what's people's pleasure? Councilwoman Parker is suggesting that we do away with the number of times totally.
No way.
Is
I'm not for that.
And the reason being, because that's how we operate currently. I
But
know.
I'm hearing other colleagues say,
I have pause for it, but you can also call the question.
Yeah, but do you do that when somebody, okay, so you got one person and that they're hot on this issue and they just keep bringing it back, but then you have other lights on. So you're kind of negating the speech of other people to try to get one person to kind of tone it down a little bit. If everybody didn't feel the absolute need to literally fill every minute, every second of their 5 minutes, every time they speak, then it might be okay, but that's not the way we operate right now. People are on camera and they're loving it, and, so I think people would be more cogent with their comments. I think it would be great.
Councilman Smith, Vice Mayor Smith, excuse me. So I think Councilwoman Parker is making a recommendation that it be unlimited.
Well, and also that we maintain the language that says a member shall speak no more than once on the same subject until all members have had the opportunity to speak. And so there should still be a a taking of turns.
Yes, that should be.
So that, to your point, no one dominates while others have their lights on waiting to speak.
And I do think we follow that pretty well.
It's not easy to keep track of.
No, it's
but
not easy,
it is-
but
It is endeavored to be, yes.
yes, I see you diligently trying to
Well,
keep up, you and the mayor.
The mayor and I,
Yeah.
yes.
And this isn't, I don't think this is captured in the rules, but one thing I have found is if we are engaging in debate, I'm the last one to speak. I have more to say, my 5 minutes are up, but no one else enters debate. To me, at that point, debate ends. You know, I'm not then called on again for another 5 minutes. And that has been fine with me. If no one else is continuing the conversation, it's not appropriate, in my opinion, to just allow someone to then have a 20-minute speech. So we may want to capture that somehow in language, you know, once no one else enters the debate,
The debate ends.
the debate ends. But other than that,
I want to support what you're saying. I think I can think of a lot of times where I can think of each of us individually have spoken 3 times. And so given the intent of this committee is to be evergreen, I'm okay making a change to 3 times speaking. I think that's kind of where we land anyways when there's somebody that feels passionate about something. But I'm not okay with unlimited. So
Well, we can try 3 and make it
Yeah.
enforced.
my point is I'd rather do 3 and follow the rules than 2 and repeatedly break them
Or suspend them.
because 3 is not used very often.
And,
We have an unsaid unlimited now, if you think about it.
and I like Councilwoman Parker's rule that when there are no more lights on, that's it. Nobody gets to speak anymore.
Well, if only one member wishes to continue speaking, but no one else wishes.
But I'm just saying,
yeah.
if nobody else has turned their lights on when someone has finished speaking, that's a pretty good indication that debate is over.
At that time, by that point, you're talking to yourself, if that's true. You're
Well,
debating yourself.
or you could make, or you could, but sometimes we have people speak to something that everybody already supports, and they say something, and then there's no more discussion, and we just vote.
I think 3 gives you a chance to introduce a thing, to rebut one comment from another person, and potentially another back and forth. And at this point, I think, to Councilwoman Helsley's comment, I think there's nothing more needed other than that, and council still has the right to reserve,
To call the question,
to call the question or to
suspend the
suspend the
rules.
rules, either one. So I'd rather go 3 and abide it than 2 and break it all the time.
If you're going 3 and you still got the suspension of the rules, it's for naught, really. I mean, that, again, that's the big question. Are you going to, and that's probably part of Robert's rules, is a suspension. I'm not sure of that, but I'm looking at Mr. Johnson,
Yeah, don't be
kind of
looking
a
at me.
question. Is that part of Robert rules?
Suspension of rules?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are we doing? You haven't really, go ahead. You're a sitting member. You've gone through it more than I did.
No,
I could just think of a lot of times where each person has, not every person, but people have needed 3 times. I just can't see the need for a 4th without suspending the rules. I think 2 can be too few
for difficult.
sometimes.
For difficult agenda items.
I think
will
3 is
say,
a sweeter spot than the 2, I guess is my point.
I rarely speak more than once, maybe twice, but, but that kind of all evens out. What I'm hearing is we have 2 colleagues that want to move it to 3. Are we totally opposed to trying 3 and it be enforced?
Then they should try to enforce the rules as they are, and now we have a new rule and we're increasing it. That seems kind of crazy, but okay.
Well, no, I'm asking. We have 2 people that say go to 3.
That's fair.
That's fair.
What's your?
Well, I'm fine with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So Councilwoman Helsley, you're suggesting that we stick with the two
And actually,
and enforce it until we get kind of tired of that, and then we'll adjust it here again.
will you please turn on your mic?
Or just be more cogent with the remarks. I think some people just don't. They just like, it's like airtime. And I just think there's not much that you can say that you need more than 5 minutes for, or at a turn, probably 2. I mean, even filling 2 minutes is like, that's a lot of words.
Well,
But that's just my opinion.
What about,
yes, sir.
Madam Chair, if, why?
Who's driving this ship?
Why wouldn't, why would you not try to adhere to what we haven't, I'm going to include myself, adhere to for all these years before you change it?
I think that's a wise.
I think that's a very good decision, a wise thing. And that would be another example of telling the administration, these are things that are in our rules and we need to enforce them first. And there's nothing, again, I don't guess there's anything that can ever stop a member from wanting to bring a change.
Well, it would be harder to, we can suspend our rules, and that gives us some options, but it's hard to suspend the rules, to rework the rules mid-meeting. I just worry that this will overcomplicate things. My preference through this process is for us to align our rules with our current practice. Unless the rules give us an option to act in a rare situation, and we may not have used it because it's such a rare situation, but I want those to remain. But in this case, I don't see a reason to move away from how we are currently doing it. And where I see a lot of examples that come to mind are around zoning, or the animal care ordinance was one discussion that makes me think of council members entering debate more than 2 or 3 times and needing that time. I would want to see if we did move to limiting debate, which I see no justification for limiting debate. I would want to see more clarification in these rules about how your time is counted when you're asked questions, which makes it more difficult for the recorder to manage and follow time.
Can I ask for clarification? When being asked a question or when asking a question?
For instance, if I give my 5-minute comment on an agenda item, and then at the end of the agenda I say, and so in response to what you said, Councilman Roberto, could you tell us more about XYZ? Is that part of Councilman Roberto's 2 times to talk, or no?
No.
He's consuming your time.
Well, my time is up. I took all of my time, waited till the last second, and asked a question.
Well,
We're clearly not at all equipped to.
Yeah, and another example is when you start to speak and ask a 30-second question, and somebody from the administration gives a 4-minute
Right.
response.
That takes your
So
time.
back to the needing of 3, like, that's how sometimes you jump to that need is
Right.
somebody answering your question can zap all your time for the first one. Right,
Yeah.
and then you want to come back and ask the second question that you wanted to in the first 5 minutes, and now you're done, and I can't ask the second thing I really plan to do in my second 5 minutes. So that's how that can happen.
Yeah, that's my
Madam
concern.
Chair,
Yes,
but
Mr. Pavlis.
to
Former Vice
Councilwoman-
Mayor Pavlis.
Parker's point, she said what I ascertained from her comment is that you still have the ability on that rare occasion when you might need that additional time to suspend the rules. And I think council members are astute enough that sit up here would know the difference when it was truly that, I don't even want to say exception, but it's that time, if you will, to use the tool of a suspension of rules. So I still maintain, I would recommend that you do let's enforce what we haven't enforced for gosh knows how many years before you go to another rule. That doesn't make sense to me. It really doesn't. Particularly with the ability to suspend the rules, which will always be there unless somebody changes Robert's rules, which I don't think that's going to happen.
I don't know how much longer you want to go, but.
I'm okay with proceeding as is and enforcing what we have, but I think this discussion alone highlights the circumstance where you would need more than two
More than
times to
2 times to
speak.
speak,
So
yes.
We've
And-
each
and
we've
we
each
have
needed three
another-
now. you
We
know.
have another meeting coming.
Do you want to get to electronic?
Yeah, go ahead and let's finish that real quick.
Okay.
We're going to come, okay, Mr. Johnson wants to talk to us about a new law from Tennessee about electronic voting.
Yes,
So,
yes.
and then we've talked about that other one, so I'm not sure.
Yes.
We'll
Thank-
take a vote later on it.
Thank you. So the legislature passed a bill this past session, or in this past month, I think, concerning electronic participation of council members, but also county commissioners, but as it pertains to city council. The legislature is allowing, it's permissive in nature, so city councils don't have to adopt this or allow for it, but if they do wish to, by a 2/3 vote, and by the way, this is on page 37 of your packet, by a 2/3 vote of the body, they can allow for electronic participation for 3 excuses, essentially. So, and they're limited to these 3. Inclement weather, the member has been called into active service, a military service, or a family or medical emergency. Those are the 3 reasons that it can be used. Other requirements of the bill, or the act rather, is that a physical quorum still must be present in the chamber. You still have to have a quorum, so 5 members would still have to be in attendance physically. And given the nature of the ratios put into the bill, for city councils, for the sake of city council, only 1 member could be absent physically and participate remotely. So you could have 2 people absent with legitimate excuses, but only one of them would be able to participate remotely. Well, that would have to be in the policy.
Yeah,
So,
we'd have to create a policy. Well,
well, or first come, first serve, but
first come,
I'll
first.
get to that. A member can only be excused essentially twice per year. And there are other requirements about notice requirements and the recording of the meeting, things that this body is already in compliance with. And there would have to be a policy to be adopted. I've thought a little bit about how this would work if city council were to consider, adopting this policy or adopting a policy to allow for it. There would have to be issues, I think there would need to be, that policy would need to include some kind of notice requirement so that the council member who was going to be absent would have to give notice. And there would have to be some kind of deadline for that to allow time for staff to make that possible. That policy would need to give some direction to the recorder about how they were going to do that part of their job. And this is just me thinking through this, that in the actual meeting itself, that the presiding officer, the mayor, may need to make a statement to memorialize the facts of the case, that this member is participating remotely for this reason. They're visible on the screen. There's a physical quorum present in the room, just to make sure that we're
Yes.
in compliance with the law. And that could be recorded in the minutes for, for a permanent record.
And I told Mr. Johnson, this rule was put in place, I believe, by Senator Briggs or pretty soon after that, during the war, when so many people were being called up for guard duty, and people they weren't, and a lot of them were elected officials all across Tennessee, and they could maybe participate remotely, but due to being military service, back then it was also if you were out of town for work, because I participated on school board once, and my picture, I was up on the screen, and they did say into the meeting that, Board Member Fugett's not here, and I sat at a conference and did it. So I do think we need to look at codifying that and deciding how people, if two people are out, which one gets to be the person that participates. No.
Looks optional. You can opt in
Yes.
or opt out.
And, yeah, but,
You don't want it?
but
Okay.
what?
Sorry, I was voting prematurely.
So what do we want to do with this? Because Vice Mayor Smith, I think you have an opinion.
Yeah, I'll go after Councilwoman Parker.
Oh, Councilwoman Parker?
Oh, and I think that was on her earlier, but I did have a question. Any clarification, I know this is new, around this language about the chair being able to visually identify the participant?
Yeah, they have to see you on screen
We would
so
have
that
to-
people know it's you.
I'd have to put like a little window with your picture up on the screen.
It's interesting that it just says by the chair rather than like
Yeah.
Well,
visible to
I
the
mean-
public or.
Practically speaking, some mayors don't have a device at their seat. And some mayors may choose to, but
Yeah, so you can be
And-
called
and-
upon.
And some cities don't have an ability, screens for other people to
Yeah.
view.
Yeah,
I was on the screen.
yeah. And that would be the case if we
Yeah, if
adopted
we
a
did it,
policy.
probably.
I think an expectation with this community's level of engagement is that they would expect to see the person probably visually, not just the presiding officer.
So we could add that to our policy. Vice Mayor Smith?
I think this is, for us, not a problem. So I would suggest we opt out of this. It invites a whole bunch of complexity.
Ooh, I disagree.
This allows for the ability to vote electronically from not being here, correct?
If for those reasons.
Yeah, so
Like-
the municipal legislative body is dealing with a family or a medical emergency as determined by a municipal legislative body. What's a medical emergency?
So I'm sorry,
Um,
sorry.
I can
I'm
come
just
up
te-
with one, a
I'm just
clear
telling
one.
you, I'm just telling you how I saw it used.
Yeah.
We had a member of the Board of Education who was hospitalized, undergoing treatment for perhaps pneumonia. They felt well enough to participate, but they couldn't leave the hospital. So that was a medical reason. They could vote. They were sitting up in bed. We saw them, that we did shoot them from the face up. We didn't make their hospital gown scene. But sometimes when, especially if it's a difficult situation, you want everybody there to vote. So my thought is I would rather give us this option than, even if it's not used much, because you could be staying at the hospital with a sick parent or a sick child and maybe be able to step away for an hour to be in the hospital on a meeting.
I can think of a lot of other complexity this invites, so I don't see this as a good idea. I can see the example you just gave, Councilman Fugit, or Chair Fugit, and makes total sense in that scenario. I can see a bunch of others where this inclement weather.
Well, we could choose not to allow inclement weather. Our policy could probably be more restrictive.
Yeah. We've had every flavor of weather over the past few years.
Okay, we're
I'd have to
not,
think on this one a little
we're
bit.
gonna
I
have
get
to
the
think on
military
this.
service one, totally clear. The rare circumstance you outlined for the Board of Education, somebody's in hospital and really wants to wait, I get that too. Maybe to think about this one a little bit more, at least for me.
all right, so we voted on nothing today.
No, you voted on
Oh,
earlier.
yeah, we voted on the big batch, and then okay. So since we have beer board in 9 minutes, I'm going to ask when our next meeting is scheduled. And,
The next meeting is scheduled on June 24.
all right, so our homework between now and June 24th is look at the rest of these that we have not gone through. Be prepared to fully come vetted with your opinion or recommendation. If you see something that needs to be changed, we need to get moving and wrap this up, because we still have to talk about the charter question, the charter review process question. So anything else? All right, if not, we are adjourned. Thank you for making progress on what we did earlier, and we will take the rest of these up on June 24th. Yeah, there's my gavel. All right.